Ascended, aspects, darken, Baccai. These four terms are all interconnected, and all stem from a single source, celestial magic. However, they are not all one and the same, and don't all play by the same rules. Even so, the boundaries between them can be difficult to discern at times, and I've seen no end of debate among the community over this subject. I've even participated in a fair amount of it myself. So, in the hopes of finally putting this matter to bed, let's look at all the lore around these entities, the circumstances that led them to become what they are, and how they truly relate to one another. Celestials, the highest form of divinity in League's universe. While the world of Runeterra has many different kinds of gods, those of the celestial nature can be considered the oldest and most powerful. Even so, the Celestials themselves do not all fit neatly into a single category. There are star dragons like Aurelian Sol, believed to originate at the dawn of time, who filled the vast expanse of space with starlight. Then you have the star children, like Soraka, who weave the pattern of destiny itself. There are a few oddballs like Bard, who seem to be spirits embodying the rhythm of the universe itself, at least as far as humans can properly understand them. Most prevalent, however, are the aspects, being said to embody and rule over various concepts throughout the universe. Now, I've already made a theory video discussing my beliefs on what the aspects truly are and how they came to be, so feel free to check that one out if you haven't already. But for a brief recap, the aspects are powerful cosmic beings that reside in another realm of existence, and interact with the physical realm through mortal hosts. These vessels, more often than not, are chosen at the peak of Mount Targon, a gateway into the celestial realm. In exchange for becoming an aspect's vessel, a human is granted power and knowledge that can only really be described by most as divine, and those who become a vessel for an aspect are often said to be considered more than human in some way. However, despite all the benefits that being an aspect may have, at the end of the day, they are still human. An aspect's power comes directly from the celestial entity inhabiting their body. If that connection is severed, then the host will presumably become mortal again. I say presumably because we only actually know of one instance of this happening, and yet the mortal in question was still able to retain traces of the aspect's power. If it weren't obvious, I'm referring to Aatrox and the god of war that was inside him, Pantheon. That god was presumably killed when Aatrox ran his sword through Atreus' chest. But Atreus survived through sheer willpower and later found himself able to call upon the lingering embers of Pantheon inside him. Those same embers would later be corrupted and resurrected by the Black Mist to create ruined Pantheon. Whatever the case may be, it is undeniable that an aspect's power comes directly from the celestial entity embodying them, regardless of whether or not that celestial entity is still alive. In addition to wielding cosmic magic, those who play host to aspects also usually gain a degree of physical enhancement as well. Increased speed, stamina, strength, and endurance. In some cases, an aspect may even undergo a slight transformation, such as altered hair color or glowing marks on the skin. The most extreme examples of this are probably Kael and Morgana, who were exposed to celestial power before they were even born due to their pregnant mother being chosen as the aspect of justice. Additionally, aspects seem to age at a much slower rate, or perhaps not at all. Zoe, for example, has supposedly been a child for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We have no confirmation of any aspects ever dying of old age, but the fact that new hosts are chosen does imply that they've been killed off before, such as when Aurelian's soul burned Pantheon's previous host alive with starfire. Even so, killing a host is not enough to kill the deity itself. So unless you have some specific means of targeting the actual aspect, like a Darkin weapon, a new body can eventually be found to hold it. In general, an aspect is chosen by a specific god to fulfill a specific purpose. Whether it's waging war against a particular enemy, protecting something of specific value, or inciting some form of change in the world itself. An aspect usually only embodies one host at a time, though Kale and Morgana show that a celestial deity can choose to manifest in more than one individual, at the cost of splintering itself and its power. Ultimately, if a human becomes an aspect, then they are beholden to that god's will and must act on whatever agenda Targon's deities may have, even if those agendas contradict one another. Contrasting the aspects are the Ascended, otherwise known as God Warriors or the Sunborn. Now, the full history of Ascension is still not entirely known, but here's the gist of what we do know. A long time ago, in an age all but forgotten, the aspects encountered the void and began preparing countermeasures against it. One of these countermeasures was enslaving Aurelian's soul to fight at their beck and call. But while the Star Dragon was quite capable of closing void rifts, it came at the cost of potentially destroying the world the aspects wished to rule. Thus, they came up with another plan. The aspects of Targon would create an army to fight the void in their stead. It's unknown exactly how the exchange occurred, but the aspects taught the denizens of Shurima, who at the time were nothing more than a small tribe of desert dwellers, how to transform themselves through cosmic power. They created a sun disk, a device used to channel the energies of the sun, and taught the Shurimans how to use it in the rite of ascension. This ritual allowed an ordinary human to bathe in the magics of the universe, transforming them in mind and body. Unlike the aspects, the Ascended did not need a cosmic deity inhabiting them. In a way, this was more of a complete transformation that made mortals into the equivalent of lesser celestials. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that the process is better. Humans, after all, aren't meant to have that kind of power in the first place. And without a proper deity to regulate it, the transformation can be overwhelming. While some were able to successfully complete the rite, others simply perished in the attempt. Somewhere between these two extremes, however, is a third, arguably worse result: the Baccai. We'll come back to them in more detail later, but a Baccai is what happens when an ascension ritual goes wrong, turning the participant into a deformed monster and usually driving them mad to some degree in the process. Make no mistake, though, Baccai are still far and above much stronger than average mortals, and not to be taken lightly. But back to the matter of the Ascended. When the ritual works, it produces beings who are able to wield immense power and knowledge of their own accord. Ascension manifests the most defining elements of a person externally. The reason why most of them resemble animals is because, allegedly, Shurimans already use beasts of the desert to symbolize certain traits and ideals. The association with jackals being wise or crocodiles being fearsome is simply engraved into their culture. However, if someone from another nation were to undergo ascension, theoretically their form could look quite different. Regardless of appearance, though, an ascended being is certainly not to be taken lightly. Physically, they are able to rival the aspect's hosts, and perhaps even surpass them in some cases. In addition to enhanced speed, stamina, strength, and endurance, the Ascended also have incredible regenerative abilities. We've seen multiple instances of them surviving what should be fatal blows, reattaching severed limbs, and in one instance continuing to fight for a short time even after being pierced through the brain. However, while the Ascended are extremely difficult to kill, it can be done, and has multiple times. Furthermore, while these god warriors also have vastly extended lifespans, it is confirmed that they are finite. Whereas we still don't know for sure if an aspect's host can even age at all, so long as they are still being host to that aspect. To that end, an ascended being's mind is also still quite susceptible to corruption, or influence from outside sources. To put it simply, ascension is basically just the process of pouring celestial energy on yourself and trying to mutate yourself into a lesser god. And though I personally feel demigod would be a more apt description, that term is already taken by Freljord's deities. By contrast, aspects are humans who house a proper deity inside of them, and reap the benefits only so long as that deity continues to reside within them. Now, at this point, I have to address the elephant in the room. There is a character who seems to imply that there's a greater overlap between the aspects and ascended than what I've mentioned so far. Aatrox. His bio mentions that he was chosen to embody a celestial ideal, which does make it sound like he's playing host to an aspect. I'm gonna be completely honest with you all, I don't understand this one. I've spent hours poring over everything we know about both aspects and ascended, and I really can't make sense out of it. None of the other ascended characters we know about make any mention or reference to being directly tied to a cosmic entity. What's more, if the Ascended were inhabited by celestial gods like the aspect of Targon, should that not mean that the aspects could rein the Ascended in? We've seen that Celestials can fully possess a mortal vessel if they so choose, like Pantheon did with Atreus or Justice did with Kaihira. You would think that being inhabited by aspects would mean that they'd rein in the god warriors and stop the Darkin war from happening. But no, that entire conflict happened because the Ascended are, at the end of the day, still humans at heart. I mean, sure, the aspects are no strangers to fighting each other, but at the end of the day, they've never reduced an entire continent into a nearly barren wasteland as a result. In the end, I don't claim to understand the canon better than the people who are writing it, but I honestly believe that this segment of Aatrox's bio was a mistake. The Darkin are, after all, an extremely messy subject, due to the fact that Riot clearly never had a solid vision for them until Aatrox's VGU. Before that, they were aliens, and before that, they were an enigmatic race that no one knew anything about. But I also have other videos delving into that subject, so for now we'll just say that Aatrox's celestial ideal may or may not refer to something other than an aspect. With that out of the way, though, let's move on and talk about the Darkin as a whole. In the current lore, the term Darkin has a somewhat complicated history. In the ancient Shuriman language, it translates roughly to one who has fallen from grace, or something to that effect. After Zareth killed the Emperor and destroyed the capital, a power vacuum opened in Shurima, and the Ascended, who were once warriors dedicated to the Empire's defense and expansion, were all too eager to fill it. This led to them turning on one another and waging a great and bloody conflict as a result. There are multiple reasons why things turned out the way they did. Each and every one of the Ascended had a different vision for what Shurima's future should be. Some simply wanted to continue Azir's lineage as best they could, while others wanted to take the seat of power for themselves. Some might have even advocated for a new system of governments altogether. Unfortunately, rather than talk things out and coming to any sort of mutual understanding, these divine protectors went to war with each other. and they warred for some 100 years, because even Ascended have trouble dealing fatal blows to other Ascended. We currently know of 3 main reasons why the Darkin War happened. The first and most obvious reason is, as I said, that these god warriors are still human at heart, and all too capable of succumbing to their own egos. They see a power vacuum and they want to fill it. The second reason is that, as it turns out, even the Ascended can be traumatized by staring into the eldritch horrors of the void. Their minds may not break as easily as humans, but it's still clearly established that some of them went at least a little bit mad after dealing with the horrors that Acathia had unleashed. Whether or not the original Ascended succumbed to this fate is unclear, but the point is that it left many of them unstable, for lack of a better term. Finally, the one who instigated the Darkin War, Zelani, used her blood magic to manipulate some of her own allies into attacking each other, no doubt taking advantage of their already fragile minds. Thus began a conflict in which the once venerated heroes of the Empire tore down whatever remained of its glory after Xerath's usurpation, and led the continent into an age of chaos, death, and destruction. It's for this reason that the people of Shurima started to refer to them as Darkin, and why the aspect of Twilight ultimately had to intervene. While she was able to ultimately lure some of them into a fatal trap in Narimazeth, Zoe's predecessor, Maisha, apparently decided that it would be easier to confine these rogue Ascended rather than kill them all. Thus, she enacted a plan to trap them in their own weapons, finally putting an end to the conflict. Unfortunately, these weapons now had the ability to possess people and turn them into warped mimicries of the god warriors prior to their imprisonment. So the problem wasn't exactly solved, but more so put on hold. Considering that the aspect of Twilight has the power to freely travel across the cosmos, I feel like you probably should have hidden these weapons away somewhere in deep space where no one would ever be able to find them, but hey, that's just me. So, to summarize, Darkin in modern-day Runeterra refers to mad Ascended who have been trapped inside their own weapons. They have the power to possess any living creature they come into contact with, but are ultimately mere shades of their former power and glory. Of course, that doesn't mean that they're incapable of killing armies or destroying cities, but they're probably not as powerful as true Ascended anymore. And on that note, let's move on to our final topic of discussion, the Baccai. As mentioned before, Baccai are those who ultimately couldn't complete the rite of ascension, leaving them as sort of halfway point. They're described as being malformed, though because most Baccai seem to cover themselves in some fashion, it's hard to know to what extent. To be honest, there's still a lot we don't know about the Baccai. How long their lifespans are or how strong they are compared to proper Ascended is up in the air, but they're still powerful enough to pose a genuine threat to most mortals. Now, it's here that we have to address yet another elephant in the room. Is Xerath a Baccai? Many writers have gone on record to say yes, but many official sources have listed him as a full-blown Ascended. Again, I don't want to claim to know the canon better than those who actually write it, but for my money, I'd say that Xerath is not a Baccai, at least not traditionally. Being Baccai implies that the ritual failed on some level, but for Xerath it clearly did not. To clarify, Xerath is not the way he is because he was deemed unworthy. Being worthy has nothing to do with your capacity to ascend. This ties in further to my previous argument that Ascended are not chosen by a celestial entity, but simply mutated by exposure to cosmic power. Xerath's entire plan literally hinged on the fact that Renekton was living proof of this. Someone who wasn't intended to undergo ascension, yet managed it regardless. When Zareth hijacked Azir's ascension ritual, he used his power to bind the priests in place, keeping it going for longer than it was supposed to. Rather than simply transforming his body, Zareth made himself into a being of arcane power by absorbing all the magic the sun disk had to offer, presumably. In a way, Zareth ascended beyond ascension, something that no one had ever even attempted before. This is confirmed by the fact that not just one, but two other god warriors proved incapable of truly defeating the Magus. That said, while it's unquestionable that Zareth's power is on par or greater than that of his peers, you can certainly make the argument that it's driven him mad in the process. Whether or not that alone is enough to constitute being a Baccai is debatable, but I think at best you can make the argument that Zareth is both Ascended and Baccai, if such a thing is possible. Of course, that leads us to a relatively new bit of information revealed by Legends of Runeterra and Cassante's bio. See, as it turns out, Zareth didn't just take the power of the sun disk. He's practically transformed himself into one in a twisted, roundabout way. The Magus has the power to effectively transform others through his own warped ascension ritual. Rather than using the power of a celestial object or being, Zareth can simply use his own magic to transform living entities, and in some cases fuse them together. Cassante's bio explicitly refers to these creatures as Baccai. So yes, I think it's safe to say that Zareth is, on some level, above them. So, in conclusion, an aspect is someone whose body is inhabited by a celestial god. An ascended is someone who's been mutated into a lesser deity by celestial magic. A Darkin is an ascended being who went mad and has been sealed inside their own weapon, and a Baccai is someone or something that's been horribly malformed by an improper ascension ritual. I do hope that this was helpful to all of you, but by all means, feel free to leave your thoughts and comments down below. See you all next time.